Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I just let everyone find a seat. If I could begin by introducing myself, I'm Jo Williams. I'm Chair of Keele University Council. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to the day and to welcome you to Keele University. And also to say a huge thank you to all of you for sparing the time today to really come along and share your thoughts and ideas about such an important issue as tackling inequalities. And I think it's, looking at the programme, it's going to be a really inspiring day, thought-provoking, and I hope enjoyable. And I'm really sorry, I have to say that at the beginning. I can't stay for the day, just for the introductions, because I've got a business review committee, which is the strategic committee of the university, and I have to attend that. So forgive me for not being with you for the whole day. So I'm just going to say a few words by way of introduction. I was a student at Keele in the late 60s and early 70s, and we were the group that really started pushing out some boundaries. There was a lot of press coverage of people bathing nude when the sun shone here on the campus. You can hardly believe this, but we were able to change the rule that said that after 10 o'clock, men and women couldn't visit each other's rooms. It's hard to imagine in this today's generation. And so much more, really, that defined the 60s and the early 70s. But for me, it was a wonderful opportunity, a very exciting time. It was certainly a fun place to be. I made lifelong friends, I gained a good degree, but most of all, I found myself, and that was a wonderful thing. And 5 years ago, I was asked if I would like to join Keele Council, and then last September, I was appointed as chair of council. And it's a strange thing walking around this campus, reminding myself of how it used to be and those years so long ago. And I kind of end up pinching myself to think, here I am in the role of chair of council, a student who gained so much, and I hope through my current role, I can contribute to the future of this great university. So I'm just going to say, just for a couple of minutes, what does council do? Well, it sets strategic direction. It holds to account. The Vice-Chancellor and the Executive Office is welcome. Please do come and take a seat. And it makes sure that the resources are used appropriately to do the very best we can for our students, as well as playing our part as a leader in our local community. And it's made up of lay people like myself. We have representatives from the students' unions. We have representatives from the staff body, as well as the senior executives of the university. And for me, it's really important that we have good governance, but also that in my role as chair, I try really hard to ensure that all voices are heard. And that's part of what today is about, that diversity, embracing different ideas and different thoughts. And we are richer, all of us, through that process. So this year we've just signed off a new strategy, but it's really rooted in the words and the thinking of our founder, Lord Lindsay, who had this concept post-Second World War that he wanted to create a new kind of place for learning, a new university, which offered the opportunity in a different way to the traditional university. And I think we've stayed true to that concept. And his thoughts was about the pursuit of truth in the company of friends. And our mission now is still, and will continue to be, to make a difference in society by providing innovative, high-quality education for students from all backgrounds, and by undertaking world-leading research that transforms understanding and brings benefit to society, communities, and individuals. And there's a lot of words there, but basically it is about enabling all to take advantage of learning and growth and development. So I'm enormously proud of the fact that we have a very diverse student population, and we actively seek to attract students from a whole range of different communities, and we're successful at it, and I hope that we will continue to do just that. We've still more to do in relation to attracting a diverse workforce, but we're determined to make progress on that too. So finally, why is it important to me to embrace diversity and make sure that there's relentless pursuit of equal opportunities for all? Most of my working life, I've been in the social care and health sector, and I was driven initially by a rather idealistic view as a social worker that through supporting and helping people, I could in some way help them to fulfill their potential and take control of their own lives. And that was, you know, idealistic and true throughout my life. But I worked a lot with people with a learning disability, and they really challenged my thinking. It wasn't just about help and support. It was the real issue for them was their rights. And that really transformed my thinking. And I think when we think about ensuring that whatever our background, our position in society, gender, race, sexual orientation, we are absolutely entitled to be treated in the same way. And that really is a passion for me, and I know for many of you in this room today. And so I'm sorry I won't be here. It looks a really exciting programme. Do have a good day. Do challenge each other, learn from each other, and I look forward to hearing the outcomes of the full day. So thank you very much indeed. I'm going to hand over to Professor Derek McGee, who's the director of our Keele Institute of Social Inclusion, and we're celebrating a one-year anniversary today, I think. Okay, over to you, Derek. Thank you. Thank
you. So I'm the person who is coughing throughout Joe's very inspiring presentation, and I might do some coughing during this part of the presentation. So thank you very much for coming. It's lovely to see. Just keep on coming in. There's plenty of seats here. There's seats at the other end as well. So indeed, we are actually going to be celebrating our first year anniversary. It's 1 year and 1 day since we actually launched, and on the 14th of June last year. And Ruth Smith came and did a blistering presentation, really challenging us as an Institute for Social Inclusion in terms of the local challenges just in the Stoke-on-Trent area, the North Staffordshire area that we should be addressing. Just to go back, the Institute is part of a suite of 3 institutes. Just keep on coming through, there's plenty of seats. So we're the Keele Institute for Social Inclusion. We have also the Institute for Sustainable Future and for Global Health. In terms of our mission, the Institute was set up by our Executive Dean, Shane O'Neill. Take a bow, Shane. This is, without Shane, this Institute wouldn't have happened, and there was a great deal of work to do to actually set it up and to persuade the Keele population of academics that it was a necessary thing, and here we are. So it was set up to be an interdisciplinary research hub, centred in the humanities and social sciences, but very interdisciplinary across all of the 3 faculties. part of our ethos is co-production and collaboration with non-academics, non-university people, and many of you are here. This is actually working. You'll see from the programme, there's a lot of non-academic NGOs, charities, etc., all here today presenting. They're not just randomly presenting, they're actually already collaborating on Keele Institute for Social Inclusion funded projects. And I'm so proud of that, and we really want to build on that base. My vision for the Institute is it should be locally rooted and very involved in North Staffordshire, but we need a global presence as well. So you'll hear today throughout the conference some of our more local projects. But in terms of global presence, Keele Institute for Social Inclusion members are doing research in Lebanon, Africa, China, Philippines, Japan, elsewhere. In fact, Annetta Hayes and I, a whole group of us went over to Lebanon. Some of them are here today. Ellie's here today, just in May to visit some of the refugee settlements and schools. And Annetta Hayes and I are going back at the end of the month to do some more field work with the Palestinian refugee schools and also the Syrian refugee schools. So we're not just doing local projects, we're also doing more global projects. But we're learning from the global and the local are coming together. There's a lot of shared challenges we're realising when we're out there doing the more international work. So just to introduce our current themes, which many of you know about, and actually one of them, we're here at the conference for Tackling Inequalities. So Tackling Inequalities is led by Fazana and also Mariangela. Mariangela is away at a very, very important meeting which could result in a very big grant for her, so we've allowed her to go off today. I just want to extend a huge thanks to Fazana for all of the work she's done to make sure that this conference happened. It's been an enormous amount of work. There's been a big team of people helping her. Nicola, Gemma, Mariangela have said, and loads of other people have been volunteering and helping, but Fazana has actually done most of the work. And she's on research leave, which a huge thank you to Fazana. We also have supporting communities led by Ronnie Lippens and Interrogating Democracies, and he's actually here today, Anthony, at the back hiding of the Anthony Cowders is our director. So these are our current themes, and these themes are going to evolve and change, and we're going to develop a whole range of focused sub-themes going on. It is kind of early days, it's only 1 year in for us. In terms of membership, just quickly, we have 250 members, which is fantastic. 206 of them come from academics across Keele. As you'll see, most of them are from humanities and social sciences, so there's much more work we have to do to increase the number of the members from other faculties, and I'm busy doing that sort of work. You'll note only 15 non-academic, non-university members, so any of our non-university, non-academic, sorry, non-Keele colleagues and friends who are here, please sign up. It's just such an easy process. It takes about 20 seconds, and that way you can be much more involved and we can communicate much more directly with you if you're a member. I'll give you some details about signing up in a few moments. What activities have we been up to? We've had 2 funding rounds. In April 2018, we funded 15 very small projects, very initial projects. The second round was launched in October 2018, and we funded 22 projects, and quite a few of them will be actually showcasing their work today alongside their non-academic co-production partners. In 2019 and 20, we're going to have another funding round, but we're shaking things up a little bit. Please come in, just find a seat. In 2019, we're going to be launching the KISI Active Partnership Programme. Now, this is very exciting. If you're not an academic, if you're from outside the university, maybe sit up and take notice, because we've earmarked £10,000 for the KISI Active Partnership Programme. We're calling it CAP. It will be launched on the 15th of July, and Gemma Scott, the amazing Gemma Scott, who's probably beavering away somewhere in the background here today, and I have designed a whole load of guidelines and expression of interest forms and application forms, etc. What are we trying to do? We're trying to get our non-academic partners and members to actually carve out research areas from their perspective. What is really a priority for them? So they have to establish, what do we really need to know? What do we really need for our organisation? They then have to find academic partners, and if you don't know the academic partners yet, we'll be creating a matchmaking service. There'll be a bit of a lion's den interview process, and what we're offering is between £2,000 and £5,000 for this very initial pilot fund. And we just think it's just another way to deepen our co-production, our collaborative sort of ethos at KISI. So watch this space. We'll be emailing out this invitation to anyone who's within GDPR regulations, anyone who's ever shown an interest in KISI from the outside world, as we would call them. And just a few more details, follow us on Twitter, please, email us, contact us, and if you want to sign up for membership, it's like a 20-second process, please sign up. Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to hand over to Fazana, who's going to just take us through the programme. And I just want to finish by thanking Fazana again. Thank you.
Down a bit. Okay. I just want to say, Derek has talked about the theme, so I'm not going to repeat that. This is the idea for this conference came out of the very first meeting that we had of the Tackling Inequalities group. And it's taken several months to plan this. And as Derek said, there's been a large number of people who've been involved in putting this together, and I'm absolutely delighted that the conference brings together academics and representatives of leading local and national organisations to reflect on these challenging and timely questions that Joe set out at the outset around inequalities. I want to say a huge thank you to Joe Williams for opening our conference today, and for the sake of time, we have listed an acknowledgement at the back of the programme guide where we've thanked all the people that have been involved. There is, I think, Najira, who isn't listed on there, who's also helping today, but I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Dr. Gemma Scott, who's been absolutely amazing in supporting this event, and also Nicola Nixon. They've done a huge amount of work behind the scenes to put this together. We've got some very high-profile speakers who've also given their time to be here today. I'm very grateful to them. In the morning, we're focusing on wider national issues, and in the afternoon, we will have a session that focuses specifically on Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire. Derek's given you the details of the Institute. Please do tweet and use the hashtag #KeelInclusion. We welcome tweets throughout the day. And there are other events that are happening in the next few weeks that you'll find details of on the website. So do come along. We welcome everyone to our events and our seminars. Finally, just to thank KISI for funding this event today. And just a quick note on housekeeping. If you haven't found them yet, the toilets are along this corridor out here to the left. So thank you, and I think we can move to the first panel. Okay, so we're starting the first plenary, which addresses the question, creating more equal societies, what works, what needs to be done. And I'm absolutely delighted that we have Dr. Asif Afridi, who is Deputy CEO at BRAP, a UK-based equality and human rights charity. Asif is chair of the Equality and Diversity Forum, which is a national network of equality and human rights charities, and a panel member of the Independent Inquiry into the Future of Civil Society. He's a published researcher and previously worked in the field of international human rights protection.
Morning. Hello. So I've been asked to talk about what does it take to create a more equal society, which I thought was quite a deep question for like 9:30 in the morning. So I'll do my best. I guess what I was thinking, so just to say a little bit about BRAP, we're an equality and human rights charity. We're based in Birmingham, and our focus is transforming the way we think about and do equality, because we think that's quite important if we're going to improve our response to inequality in the future. And when I was thinking about this question in particular, I was thinking, well, yes, it is a big question. Yes, some of the challenges are really big, systemic. But from BRAP's perspective, I suppose, I think we often ignore and downplay the individual role that we all play in maintaining systems, that we all play in creating systems of inequality. And I guess, if you wanted my answer on the back of a postage stamp, it would basically be the best way to create more equal societies is for us all to recognise the role that we all play individually in this. So the role that we will play now over the next 6 hours or so on our tables, in our interaction with each other, thinking about how we might be maintaining system dynamics of power that aren't particularly helpful in promoting equality. And I guess perspective I could probably give is that we do a lot of work with organisations. So I think the challenge often that we find when we engage with organisations who want to do something about inequality is that we think that there's like a toolbox, if you like, of interventions that we can throw at equality and diversity. And if it's interesting for you, we did a bit of a review a while ago looking at 30 years worth of strategies in Birmingham to promote equality. We looked at, well, what's similar about all the different strategies that have been done over the last sort of 3 decades or so. And basically, you can boil it down to 6 things that we tend to throw at inequality to address it. You might recognise some of these. We create a new policy. We engage with the community, make sure we've got enough representatives. We monitor progress. We're really good at that, aren't we, sometimes? We think, right, what we really need is more information. People need to know more about our services, more about what we do. That would really help to bring people in. We do training, don't we? We do a lot of training around things like legal awareness, technical stuff like how do you do an equality impact assessment. And then finally, the 6th one, we do community development. What we really need is community organisations who can do this for us. So there's something about this sort of inevitability of the repertoire of stuff that we do to promote equality. But the challenge, I guess, we've found is that we don't tend to evaluate the impact of that stuff. Why? If you look at Birmingham, patterns of race inequality have changed very little over the last 30 years. You're still much more likely to live in an overcrowded house as an ethnic minority person. You're still much less likely to get a job. So there's something about, I think, this sort of inevitability of the repertoire. So I guess what I would say is that we need to think about this stuff differently. We need to think about the principles that underlie the interventions that we use. And if I've got time, I just thought I'd share 3 principles, if you like, 3 things that I think are worth us looking at in a bit more detail. First one is representation. So I think at the moment, we often see the gold standard for representation in relation to equality as, have we got enough of them? Have we got enough black and minority ethnic people on our board? Have we got enough disabled people? And there is something about that sort of model of descriptive representation is so inadequate in some ways, but so pressing as well. It is a sign that we're doing better around equality, but for us it's a really conservative aim. We could think in much different ways about representation, think about substantive forms of representation. How much power does that black and minority ethnic person have in that boardroom, around these tables? How much do they listen to? What do people think about this? There's something around that sort of qualitative stuff I think that's interesting around representation. Second thing I'd say is who defines what equality looks like tends to be those with power that have got stuff that define what inequality looks like. If we think about the stuff that makes us most happy in our society, how am I doing for time? Okay. If we think about stuff that makes us most happy in society, it's stuff like, loads of surveys around happiness will say that the thing that makes us most unhappy is the death of a loved one. For example, it's our relationships, it's our familial relationships, our friendships. But if you look at the policies that we are adopting at the moment in this country, they are not in support of maintaining life. There are older women dying in this country earlier than they should be because of austerity. The stats are starting to come out around that. We're really, I think, a bit out of kilter in terms of how we measure inequality, what we think it is. We need to focus more on the stuff that makes us happy, and we need to focus more on speaking to people who experience inequality to work out what inequality is. We tend to count stuff that we can count. It's not stuff, that counts, if you know what I mean. And then last bit, if I've got a chance, is I think generally when we think of equality and what we do to respond to it, tends to be quite a technocratic response, tends to be about policy, tends to be about generating more paper. And it tends to be top down as well. You know what I mean? The senior leadership team say, right, we've got to do this. You go off, come up with a policy. And then the person, sort of down here, who's sort of down here, working directly with people, will often feel a bit done to, will often be a bit scared that they might mess it up. So will actually not say anything because they're worried and haven't really had much of a say in how they go about this. So there's something about how we connect, I think, what people do around equality and how that's directed with what people really would change in their day-to-day work. How can people connect with this on a personal level? How could I know that actually it's about how I talk to my colleagues when I'm going in the morning? How would I know it's how, I set up a process for grant giving to communities? How would I know this stuff if all I've got are the high level policies and I haven't had much of a say in it? So that's me done. I think we just need to think about equality a bit more and think deeper, because it actually will pay dividends in the end. Thanks.
Brilliant timekeeping as well. So next we have Rebecca Byrant, who was appointed Chief Fire Officer and Chief Executive with Staffordshire Fire and Rescue Service in April 2016. She's the first woman CFO, having progressed through the ranks in the UK, not just England. Becky joined Staffordshire in 2005 after serving with both Cheshire and Bedfordshire and Luton. Following approval of the local business case by Staffordshire Police and Crime Commissioner for a governance change in respect of the Fire and Rescue Service, Becky has overseen this work in the last 12 months. Her current responsibilities include providing strategic leadership for the continued transformation of the service alongside undertaking the role as provisional advisor to the Staffordshire Commissioner. I'll hand over to Becky.
Morning, everybody. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to follow the energetic Asif, to be perfectly honest with you. But thanks to Keel for giving me an invitation to come and talk to you all today. Originally, I didn't have the title of the plenary. And when it came through, I thought to myself, good Lord, what on earth have I got to offer in 10 minutes coming from a fire and rescue service about a topic that has been on the agenda for decades? So I thought about what does an equal society look like to me today. And there's been an awful lot of talk for a number of years about equality being about equality of opportunity. And actually, I think that's really important, but for me, there's an extra dimension to what looks like equality in societies. And that's a society where people have access to shelter, to healthcare, to education, to food, time to rest, as well as time to work. So in addition to opportunities in relation to equality, there's also the crucial element of equal outcomes to communities. So there's a fascinating book entitled The Spirit Level, Why Greater Equality Makes Society Stronger, which some people in the room may have come across. And it looks at research that was conducted into income levels and health and social care issues. And whilst the research is predominantly focused in the USA, of course the UK appears. And there's a whole host of graphs in the book looking at the correlation of data. But the one that stands out for me looks at income inequality and where that society's health and social care issues live in terms of a spectrum of really good or really poor. Where do you think the UK came? The UK came third worst. And that was looking at data such as life expectancy, which we've heard a little bit about already, literacy levels, infant mortality, and mental illness. So what does that mean to my organisation, the Fire and Rescue Service? So when I joined the Fire and Rescue Service, we didn't understand inequality in society. We're getting better at understanding it. But the reason we didn't understand it is because we didn't engage with our communities in comparison to how we engage today. When we attended emergencies, people got a service from us, but what we didn't recognise were the inequalities that led them to needing that service in the first instance. If you had a fire at home, you had a fire at home. We didn't do prevention. We waited for an emergency to happen, and then we responded. I certainly, during my time back on a watch as a firefighter riding fire engines, never went into somebody's house unless I went there because they'd had the worst day of their lives. So fast forward to right now and what's going on in Staffordshire and what's being delivered in terms of prevention by the brilliant team that I have working for me. We do recognise that greater levels of deprivation, health inequalities and life inexperience inequalities lead to the communities that need the services of the Fire and Rescue Service the most. And I thought rather than me talk about data, I want to tell you a true story, if that's okay. So last Christmas, one of our community safety officers, Pete, who works in Newcastle under Lyme, he visited a property following a referral from West Midlands Ambulance Service to an elderly gentleman who'd had a fall. Now, this elderly gentleman was living alone. He was retired. He was living with his pet house rabbit in a rented private property. Whilst we were there, we identified a gas leak, a carbon monoxide leak from the boiler, which was located in the kitchen. Also in the kitchen, believe it or not, there was welding equipment, which included acetylene and propane cylinders. For those of you that understand, that's fairly dangerous stuff to be messing about with. There was quite a high level of hoarding in the property, which meant that any safe means of escape were absolutely compromised in the event of an emergency. Now, as a result of those concerns, we took action, as you would imagine, to try and help the gentleman become safer in his home. We worked with Cadent Gas to get an engineer out to isolate the supplies. We facilitated the removal of said welding equipment from inside the property. We fitted heat and smoke alarms throughout the house. And the gentleman was left with a couple of electric heaters and one ring hot plate to ensure he was able to keep warm and cook food. And we ensured that there were safe and clear means of escape from the property. So clearly, because of these safety concerns, these risks represented a threat to the gentleman's life. Now, of course, what happens at Christmas? Everything closes down. So unfortunately, we weren't able to get the gentleman's gas supply reconnected until mid-January. At that stage, a new central heating system and boiler system were fitted. What did we do in the meantime? Well, clearly, we needed to ensure that the gentleman remained safe, remained fed, remained warm in his home, so we carried out welfare checks during that period of time. He was also left with fire safety advice, advice about buildings and contents insurance, advice about something called Lifeline, which is a pendant people can wear and press, which alerts the emergency services. And I think what this case does is represent some of the inequalities that we see in the communities every day. That visit is one of 25,000 undertaken within the county every year by your Fire and Rescue Service. And it's absolutely my view that people's vulnerability is increasing in our societies. We are seeing more and more complex cases on a daily basis. So our prevention work highlights now, to me, more than ever, we are a long way away from communities having equality of outcomes. Data taken from the fatalities in accidental dwelling fires over the last 10 years show us that the same 4 factors come up time and time again. Smoking, alcohol, mobility issues, and, unfortunately, being old, so elderly. So the same, hopefully people make the link, factors time and time again. Now, some of these issues are choices that people in our communities make. Some clearly aren't choices, but based on health issues. Now, my team see this inequality on a daily basis. We absolutely support those who have less and are experiencing inequality in where they live, the type of properties that they live in, where they work, how much they earn, how much they have to eat, and what sort of healthcare they receive. So the 2 questions as part of the plenary were what works and what needs to be done. So I wanted to just share a couple of my views on this. The thing that works for us as a fire and rescue service, first and foremost in my mind, is the simple fact that people respond positively when they are not judged about the choices that they make. And that's partly why I think we're able to support vulnerable residents, because we are non-judgmental as a service. We help residents own the change that they want to make in terms of improving their outcomes. We can't force people to change. A further aspect that does work, but can get better, is partners pulling together to address those areas of inequality that we see. We do not support complex cases as a fire and rescue service on our own. We need to work together as one team, which includes the resident, in order to get more improved outcomes. And there's no doubt that pooling those resources in the case of the gentleman in Newcastle led to better outcomes for him. In terms of some of the things that could be done to assist these outcomes in our communities, the first area for me is a real bugbear that I have in the public sector, and that is one of data sharing, or alternatively data not sharing, which is what we experience. We have to get over this fear of sharing this information, stop being risk averse, and focus on the fact that we can make a bigger difference to people's lives if we understand where the inequality exists in the first place. But because we don't share the data, we don't recognise that collectively as a public sector. I do think this would be a massive step forward for all of us. A second thing that I do think needs to be done is a refocusing of organisations onto prevention work and not response. We know waiting for people to be in the direst of circumstances leads to the worst outcomes. One of the problems, though, is how do you prove your intervention caused a negative? It goes back to the evaluation piece. For me, the worst outcome from any member of our community is their death in a preventable emergency. And whilst there's a huge amount of work to do to help create equal societies, the starting point for me is working with residents and partners in order to reduce that inequality in the first place. This does mean understanding, education and patience, and ensuring our voice is heard, and Joe's gone, who talked about voice earlier. Martin Luther King once said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." Today is one chance for us to talk about this extremely important issue, to make sure we and our organisations are positioned to make the biggest difference that we can in ensuring equal societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Becky. Okay, next we have Lynn Saunders, who's the governor of Watton Prison, where she's worked in the prison service for 27 years. She qualified as a probation officer in 1986 and has a degree in applied social sciences and an MA in criminology. She set up the charity, the Safer Living Foundation, which she chairs, a charity to help prevent sexual reoffending in 2014. She's she's worked with people convicted of sexual offences for most of her career and is passionate about the cause. And we're going to hear from Lynn next.
Okay, thank you. First off, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I have to say I was a little perplexed about what I was going to be asked to talk about. So I hope that what I've got to say will be interesting and actually form some debate. How I've looked at this is kind of my own experiences of issues of equality, working in a male-dominated system for the last 27 years. And what that means and how hopefully we are moving forward. Although I have to say, when I was asked to do it, I said I'm not going to be especially optimistic in terms of where we are. So I hope that doesn't come over too negatively. So, okay, I think it was probably quite helpful just to talk briefly today about my personal history. I know we've already just mentioned that, but it might be worth, in terms of setting the context of my thoughts and thinks about this. I want to talk briefly about the history of women working in men's prisons, my own personal experience, and then ask the question, which I think should be over to you really, how much has really changed. So I graduated from here with a CQSW, Certificate in Qualification of Social Work, in 1987, and I worked as a probation officer for 5 years. And then I joined the Prison Service Accelerated Promotion Scheme, which was their graduate fast-track scheme, in 1992, and I've worked for the Prison Service ever since. And I've been the governor of 4 prisons. My first prison, I was the governor of my first prison when I was 35. Which I have to say was an interesting challenge. It was a men's prison, and what that meant. And lots of people said lots of things when I went to work every day, and also when I gave talks about, are you really in charge of men? You know, do people listen to you? And for many years, it was fair to say there were definitely women's jobs and men's jobs in prison. And that's my own experience, but I'll talk a bit about the history of it as well too. I've been the governor of 4 prisons, 1 women's prison and 3 men's prisons, and my current prison, as we've already said, I've been the governor since 2008, which is a specialist medium secure treatment site for people with sexual convictions. And just to be clear, they are all biologically born as men, although we do have a number of transgender people too. I co-founded and chair the Safer Living Foundation, a charity, in 2014, really because I saw inequalities for the people that I'm responsible for. So it's not just about what happens to the people who work in the system, but also the people who are locked up in it too. So, history of women working in men's prisons. Well, actually, women have actually got a good background and a good history of working in prisons. You probably heard of lots of these people, but Elizabeth Fry in the early 1800s was horrified by the conditions that women and children were held in, and obviously was a major campaigner and a massive influence in terms of improving prison conditions in this country. And then Marjorie Fry, who was no relation to Elizabeth Fry, was one of the first women magistrates appointed as an education advisor to Holloway Prison, which was, up until it was closed a few years ago, a women's prison all that time. And the first female governor of prison was in 1945. But again, women were only allowed to be governors of women prisons in then, and there were no women governors of any prison until 1979, which is quite shocking, I think, in itself. And for all of that time, really, that women officers mostly worked with women. They were not allowed to work with men. They were not considered to be safe. And I'll just give you an anecdote. When I first worked in a men's prison in 1987, which was Lincoln Prison, which was it still is, a male local prison. And the security principal officer, who kind of gives you a talk when you first go into prison about kind of safety and issues and so on, he said to me, I don't agree with women working in prison. It's only a matter of time before you get raped. That was my first day working in a men's prison. I'm pleased to say that hasn't happened yet, and hopefully it won't. And women officers did not routinely work in men's prisons until 1989. And they were not allowed to work on the landings. And when I first worked as a probation officer in a prison, in a men's prison, I was not allowed a cell key. Now, bearing in mind, when you're trying to, everybody's locked up, so in order to get access to talk to anybody, you've got to be able to open a cell to be able to talk to them. And I had to ask a male colleague to open a cell so I could do my job to talk to a prisoner. So that's in my working life. However, currently there are now 47% of staff working in prisons, male and female prisons, who are female, which is obviously progress. However, we are certainly at the top of the organisation still in a minority, and again tend to be directed into certain traditionally female jobs, although that's starting to change a little bit. So, equalities issues in prisons. Things that have been said to me over the years have been particularly horror stories, certainly in terms of harassment, physical touching, comments about your body, comments about what you're wearing in the workplace were commonplace. And that has happened for many decades. I was also the only senior management team member for 10 years in different prisons who was female in a range of different prisons. I've worked in 10 prisons, mostly in senior management positions, and oftentimes the only woman. Now that's kind of moved on a bit. We have, my team, for example, is 50-50, which is great. But still, I give talks to lots of people, lots of organisations. People say these things to me even now in 2019. Do you have anything to do with prisoners? You don't look like a prison governor. Are you in charge of men? Do you work in a men's prison? You know, kind of things like that said to me even today. So the kind of acceptance that women, the implicit suggestion that women can't actually work with or be in charge of men, which I think is very interesting and probably subject of some debate today, maybe. Okay, so how much has really changed? Well, as we've said, we've got improvements in the number of female staff, but there's still, my colleagues, obviously I'm probably a bit too old for all this now and probably a bit too senior to have some of this stuff. But some of my female colleagues on the landings still talk about inappropriate comments, inappropriate touching and assumptions by male staff. And that still carries on today as I speak. So what does the future look like? Well, I wonder whether Me Too will have an impact, will change things. I went to a conference, a Governing Governors Conference a couple of weeks ago, and a senior woman stood up and for the first time really in our organisation started to talk about the abuse that she'd experienced as a senior woman working in it. And actually that was very interesting to look around the room, mostly male room, I hasten to add, and look at the response that had. And I just wonder whether prisons, like other all-male, predominantly male institutions, will also have a Me Too moment. And I wonder whether we will ever get to a point where women will be treated as equal in our workplace as they should be in everyone. So I'm sure that's open for questions and comments, and hopefully you have time to think, and also I'll obviously happy to answer any questions that people may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. And now we're going to have Professor Maggie Atkinson, who's going to respond to the three presentations and also say a few words of her own before we open up for discussion. So Maggie is a Keele graduate. She received her Ed.D. from Keele in 2008 and is currently also has an honorary doctorate from here as well as 2 other universities and is an honorary professor. She was the Children's Commissioner for England between 2010 and 2015. She's also headed up various children's services and social services departments, including in Gateshead. And since 2015, Maggie's worked as a consultant, and she's currently involved in supporting a number of children's charities, organisations and think tanks, which includes being the chair of trustees for the London Arts and Culture Education Body, A New Direction. I'm going to hand over to Maggie now.
Thanks, Fazana and colleagues. I'm delighted to be here. I want very briefly to talk about some of the themes that I feel are coming through from people, and then to give you my own personal anecdote of what it means to be a woman in a senior position, and then give you some thoughts from a macro and a micro perspective before we go into the break. It feels to me that there are some really strong themes coming out from three very diverse and different speakers, coming from three very different perspectives. The who opens the door to the communities that can't open it for themselves issue seems to me to run through the work that you do on a daily basis, the clientele that you deal with on a daily basis, the communities in which you find yourself seated, and the results that almost stare you in the face from the moment some children are born. And that's resonant of my career as well, very resonant of my career. And I think that is something that we should hold on to as we go into the day. It's the one resonating theme that I want to pick up from these three very different speakers coming from three very different perspectives. I find it fascinating that 3 out of the 4 of us are women. Because in most places where I've ever stood on a platform, that has absolutely not been the case, including in local government, in select committees in Parliament, you name it. It's rare that 75% of your presenting group for the start of a very important conference like this would be women. And I just want to leave that on the table because it's 2019. A bit about my background. I come from a very ordinary working class background in South Yorkshire, so when I got into Cambridge, the person who stopped my dad first on the street said, "What they'll own her go to university for, she's a lass." And any road, her twin brother's going somewhere else. What they'll own him go to 2 different ones for. And Dad does know there's a university in Sheffield, don't there? What they'll own him go to Liverpool for and her to flipping Cambridge, where's that? So that's my background, is the what do you expect when they come from round here? Except my comprehensive school said, we expect wherever you can reach. And my parents thought the same. And I'm very lucky, and I want to leave lodged with you that even in very unequal communities, where there is an almost locked-in sense of, if you come from round here, this is where you stay, there are lots and lots of families with deep-level protective factors that mean that actually the road set out is not the road that's then followed. And you will meet people in all the communities and all the clientele groups that you serve that buck the trend. And for me today is about how do we make it possible to buck the trend. The inequality issue that hit me the day I got the Children's Commissioner's job, and there was a lot of furore and the Select Committee tried to stop me and all sorts of things. But the day I was confirmed, the Daily Mail published a thing in its gossip column that said, "The new Children's Commissioner for England is Maggie Atkinson." Who, I hear you ask? Literally, in the paper. And then it went on and on and on how it should have been Esther Ranson, or it should have been, Terry Wogan, or it should, whatever. And the final sentence said, "By the way, just so you know, the Children's Commissioner has no children." If I'd been a man, they would never have dared. If Theresa May had been a man, they would never have talked about what she was wearing the day she walked up Downing Street. It's endemic, and it's every day. So I've worked for 40 years. I'm not an academic by trade, but I'm delighted to be an on-prof here, and I really do want to talk to you about whether we can work together. I'm not an academic. I was a teacher. Then I went into administration and training and inspection. But I've had 40 years of working for and with children and young people. And as a comprehensive school teacher, fighting the inequality battle for the kids who really struggled to read, write, think, speak, express themselves was at the heart of what I did. And it stayed that way. And as Children's Commissioner, what you're there to do is to promote and protect their rights, to stand for those who can't stand on their own 2 feet, and to help others to level the playing field. But we do it in a nation that can't just give me 2 minutes. I've summed up what they've talked about. Give me 3. We live in a nation which states that it's a country that works for everybody. For the many, not the few. No, Jeremy. Works the way out of poverty and the only way out of poverty. Well, 2/3 of kids who are poor live in families where 2 adults work. Education is an escape route out of wherever it is you are. It is if you're not excluded or put in an isolation booth because you've acted out or come to school starving and not being able to concentrate. It isn't if you're not. Equality is a legislated for concept in this country under the 2010 Equality Act. All public bodies have to act. But it's fine words that put butter no parsnips in far too many of them. The Equality Act 2010 is not lived out. So where does reality live? Well, at macro level, it lives in money pouring into London and the South East, and don't anybody kid yourselves that HS2 is about you, because it's not. It's about Euston. The macro reality is that there is no alternative austerity policy, which is not over, whatever they're saying this week. The policy and the zeitgeist is there is no alternative, with those already worst off, therefore doing worse still, and Westminster being too far away to care. And the B word has created paralysis in all other policy areas for 3 years and shows no signs of stopping doing so. At the micro level, at community and individual and family level, it looks like this, and it's best seen in data from the Office of National Statistics, from the Office of Budget Responsibility, from the Department of Health, and particularly Public Health England. So if you want research bedrock, that's where you're going to find it. And it looks like this. Life expectancy gaps of 10 to 18 years between the poorest and the richest. Infant mortality gaps of remarkable depth and reality in poor communities versus rich. All age causes of early death being far worse if you're poor. On the TV this morning, folic acid taking before you have a pregnancy. If you haven't planned your pregnancy and you haven't taken folic acid, your likelihood of anencephalic issues and or spina bifida goes through the roof in comparison to middle-class people who've planned their pregnancies and taken folic acid pre-conception. Invisible disablers, the child who can't do well at school if they are ill-shod, unkempt, unfed and unslept. Come to Sheffield with me and I'll show you schools where there are no beds in the children's homes at all, where they sleep on the floor in their school uniforms in 2019. Lowest levels of healthy life choices, health activity, fitness, cultural engagement, for the love of heaven. These kids, will they ever go to the theatre or do they just play djembe drums? Will they go to a gallery, will they go to a museum, or do they just play djembe drums and only in school? The highest levels of children looked after, diagnosed ADHD, medicated SEN and disability issues, rather than, well, he's just quirky and he needs a different school. Come with me to Wirral, M53. That side, Hoylake, lovely. He's quirky and he needs a wonderful different school. This side, Birkenhead. ADHD diagnosed and immediately medicated, and most of their special schools have free school meal children and nobody else. It's as stark as that. We do it on purpose, we make a choice. We've known for centuries that the poor get poorer and the rich get richer, and the poor take the blame and go to prison and burn their houses down and end up arrested, not just stopped. So, ladies and gentlemen, if we've known all this time, we must be making a choice. What do we do about it? We turn the investment position on its head. We invest in the north properly, however they howl down south. We do it for decades, not once. We do it on a purposeful, planned basis. We write the policies differently. When they close Parliament to mend it, we move them to Leeds and make them ride Northern Rail on the old buses on railway carcasses. But we need to do that for decades. We need at least 50 years of that to make a real difference to communities like yours in North Staffordshire, those of you who are here. And we need to prepare to be more Scandinavian in our thinking. Wealth only trickles down if you make holes in the floor that the rich are standing on. It only trickles down if you tax them properly and let poor people pay none until they've earned at least £15,000 a year. And they'll hate it, but if we're really serious about this, that's what we've got to do on a macro level that then affects the micro. And we are about a quarter of an hour away from a break. So now we're going to open it for questions, and I'm going to try and keep us to time and all of those things. So, thank you from all four of us.